Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we're going to cover Revelation chapter 8, verses 1 through 7, and I'm calling this one Silence in Heaven and the First Trumpet Judgment. There are 3 sets of 7 judgments in Revelation, and we have reached the last of the 7 seal judgments. To review, Jesus was the only one able to open the scroll that was written on the inside and the outside. That scroll sounded very similar to a title deed, which would make perfect sense as Satan has been given dominion over the earth for a time. And Jesus will be taking back ownership of the earth. Jesus not only redeems people, but will also redeem the land that is groaning for redemption. We often contrive to ignore the far-reaching consequences of the sin of Adam, as well as our own sin. God created a perfect and eternal world. In fact, it sounds like the Garden of Eden was heaven on earth. The most perfect aspect of the Garden of Eden was that man had fellowship with God. It never rained, and all of the plants were watered from the springs below or the rivers. There were not storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, or destructive aspects of weather. There was not cold nor hot either, as Adam and Eve walked around naked, unashamed and unaware. But when they sinned, that all changed. Adam and Eve, all of a sudden, were aware of their nakedness and aware of their sin. After all, God had given them explicit instructions. Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 through 17 says this, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." Perhaps Adam and Eve should have asked questions. Did they understand what it meant to die? After all, physical death did not exist yet. When they sinned, God did not kill them on the spot. In fact, we know that Adam lived until he was 930 years old. But while his physical life continued, Adam's spiritual life had ended. He no longer had fellowship with God. As we are all sons or daughters of Adam, we begin life with that same sin nature and also are born without fellowship with God. But we can obtain that fellowship, and throughout man's history, God has given us ways of dealing with our sin, removing the separation from God. Jesus handled it once and for all, and if we turn to him, we always will have fellowship. Sadly, many people blame God for everything. They blame him for death, sickness, evil, decay. Why do bad things happen to good people? First of all evil occurs because of sin and because of our choice to sin. Before we blame it on Adam, each of us would have done exactly the same as Adam, as we also have chosen sin. What's good about us? But God is incapable of evil, and if Satan appears to do anything good, it is only a posture done deceptively. As we get to the last seal judgment, reflect on what got us to this point. People have grown so sinful, and our slow-to-anger God has finally reached the point where he's going to handle it. He created us because he wanted to fellowship with us, not because he was lonely. It was all about sharing his love all along. But he knows those who will come to him, and he also knows the ones who never will. And all of creation has continued to groan for redemption for long enough, and groaned for restoration to God's purpose when he created it all. Let's read our first section of Revelation 8, verses 1 through 5. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, with the prayers of the saints, ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. Notice the sevens once again. 7 seals, 7 angels, and 7 trumpets. The 7th seal judgment contains the next 7 judgments in another category, the 7 trumpet judgments. But also notice what occurs when Jesus opens the 7th seal. There is silence in heaven for about an hour. Once again, these are the observations of John, who has been given the task of writing down all that has happened, is happening, and will happen. John is in heaven, and there are no clocks on the wall, not any sundials either, as the light emanates from Jesus the Son, not the Son. John is estimating how long that silence lasted based on his time on earth. But if 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord, then this silence could have been for 21 years. But again, God's math is different. This silence should remind us of another silence that occurred before a different judgment. Joshua chapter 6, verses 1 through 17 says this: Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king, and the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go all around the city once. This you shall do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. It shall come to pass, when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every man straight before him. Then Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, Proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord. So it was, when Joshua had spoken to the people, that the 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord, advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests, who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, You shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, Shout. Then you shall shout. So he had the ark of the Lord circle the city, going around it once. Then they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then 7 priests, bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them. But the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. And the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did 6 days. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. On that day only they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened, when the priests blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. And Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. There are some similarities to God's judgment of Jericho and to the first trumpet judgment in Revelation. First, let's notice the silence. In Revelation, it was an estimated half hour, and in Joshua, they were silent for 6 days on each of 6 trips around the city of Jericho. In addition, they were silent for 6 of the trips on that 7th day. There are 7 angels before the Lord in heaven, and each are given a trumpet, one for each trumpet judgment. In Joshua, there were 7 priests and 7 trumpets, ram's horns called shofars. Do you understand shofar? In the book of Joshua, of course, Joshua is the commander, and in heaven, Jesus is the commander. Yeshua is exactly the same name as Joshua in Hebrew. In Joshua 10:16, we see 5 kings hide in a cave, while in Revelation 6:15, kings also hid in caves. In God's judgments of Revelation, he has sealed the remnant. That means they are protected, even when his judgments affect the rest of the earth. In Joshua, though Rahab and her family were also in the city of Jericho, and all the walls came a-tumbling down, Rahab and her family were protected by God. Walking out of the destroyed Jericho would be like walking out of the World Trade Center after it fell. That brings us back to another aspect we should notice. As mentioned before, in each of God's judgments depicted in the Bible, there always seems to be 3 categories: those removed before the judgment, those being judged, and those carried safely through the judgment. We previously have discussed the Great Flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace of Babylon. This event in Joshua is another one. Rahab snuck 2 Israelite spies out of Jericho, hiding them from the king of Jericho in a basket. And those spies were removed before the judgment. Rahab and her family were carried safely through the judgment, while the rest of the population of Jericho, as well as the city of Jericho, were judged, destroyed. Once again, this demonstrates the biblical model of the rapture and seems to point to a pre-tribulation rapture. Another angel, the 8th in this passage, has a golden censer with much incense and stood at the altar. In the tabernacle, the golden altar, also called the altar of incense, was made entirely of gold. Some tabernacle furniture was made of gold and gopher wood, with gold pointing to the deity of Jesus and wood pointing to his humanity. The golden altar is all deity, as when we pray to God, he is the only one worthy and able to hear or answer those prayers. Our prayers, the prayers of the saints, have a sweet-smelling aroma unto the Lord. The prayers of the saints in heaven will do the same. It seems that our prayers will continue even when in the presence of God. On earth, the golden altar was in the holy place, just outside of the veil separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The temple veil split from top to bottom the moment that Jesus died on the cross. So there is no longer separation from the Holy of Holies where God resides. We will be in his presence. The angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to earth. That causes noise, thunder, lightning, and an earthquake. Next, we see this interesting verse. Revelation 8:6 says this: So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. How can we not think of the priests and men of war walking around Jericho? Imagine the people of Jericho watching that large group of people. On the first day, as they walked around the city of Jericho, the city dwellers inside the walls certainly wondered what was going to happen. Silence. That would be a bit eerie, wouldn't it? But each day it would add to the dread of what was about to happen. 6 days. The children of Israel were obedient for once. It takes quite a while to walk around a city. On the 7th day, they walked around the city 7 times. We can understand why this was just the men of war and not also the women and children. I can't imagine that either the women or children would have been able to remain silent. Good thing there weren't cell phones back then. But when they all began screaming, it certainly put fear into all of the residents of Jericho. After the 6 seal judgments, the people on the earth also will likely be wondering what is going to happen next. When 1/4 of the people have died, everyone will have experienced loss. Let's read this final passage today. Revelation 8:7 says this: "The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up." These trumpet judgments seem to be 1/3 as powerful as the 7 bowl judgments to come. For example, as we will see shortly, in the 2nd trumpet judgment, 1/3 of the sea turns to blood, while in the 2nd bowl judgment, all of the sea turns to blood. Similarly, in the 3rd trumpet judgment, 1/3 of the streams become poison, and in the 3rd bowl judgment, all of the fresh waters turn to blood. It makes me wonder if the trumpet judgments are 3 times as powerful as the seal judgments, and if the events of Matthew 24 are 1/3 as powerful as the seal judgments. God does everything so exactly. Most of us love the beauty of the earth. Spending time in God's creation brings me closer to Him. I particularly enjoy being in locations where we can see nothing that man made and only what God made. I also understand that all creation changed with sin, and the present earth is not as spectacular as the Garden of Eden, nor is it as spectacular as the new earth will be. The Greek word for grass used in this passage, chortos, is the same as the word for grain. So this could just as easily be a worldwide famine. That makes me think of Egypt when Joseph was in charge. Of course, we see a few things mentioning 1/3 here, and another we might overlook is that this came from a mixture of hail, fire, and blood. That in itself is scary, isn't it? When it hails, raindrops are carried into a cold part of the atmosphere, causing that water to freeze. But at the same time, this is intermixed with fire. Pretty difficult to understand the science of those two together. But God can do anything, and for the people on the receiving end, this would be scary and perplexing. And of course, blood falling from the sky takes it to a whole other level. Let's assume that the church is in heaven. We also can assume that there are tribulation saints experiencing this. But as long as they have Bibles, they will be able to know in advance what to expect next. And as I have said before, for those who know God, whether or not they endure all of the great tribulation or die, they will be with Jesus. That takes the pressure off. But the human condition is to fear. So I will also assume there are a number of tribulation saints walking in fear. Maybe that is part of the prayers of the saints in heaven prior to this judgment, praying for their Christian brothers and sisters. Of course, a third category of people are the 144,000, the remnant, sealed by God. So this will not affect them. And there is the fourth category of people experiencing this as well. Those who hate God, don't believe in God, want to be the God of their own lives. These are events unlike anything they ever have seen before. Most will look for the solutions of man to solve a judgment of God. Well, that's not going to work. But just maybe some of them will turn to God in the same way that there are no atheists in foxholes. Tomorrow we will finish Revelation 8 and continue with the trumpet judgments. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.